So I started learning a language by watching just TV shows and movies in January of 2023. And I did this basically every single day for, I'd say, about an average, just an hour a day. And my improvement has been insane. Y no voy a mentir, no puedo hablar español con fluidez, no puedo entender todo, no. I hago muchos errores gramáticas, pero mi nivel ha mejorado mucho. La verdad, está cambiando mi vida. At the beginning of 2023, I knew some already. I could say kind of basic little phrases. I could like ask for directions, order food. I could say very basic get to know you type of stuff, like just very basic phrases, and I basically couldn't understand anything that was spoken to me. I could only really understand like 2 or 3 word little phrases. Even those I had trouble with understanding. Fast forward to 2024 in January, 1 year later, now I can have conversations with people for hours. I can watch movies and shows and understand most of them without having to rely even on looking at the subtitles a lot of the time. Sort of easier to understand, like podcasts meant for language learning in the language I'm learning. I can understand those very easily, like 80 to 90% of them I can understand without even really paying attention or trying that hard. And the language I'm learning, by the way, is Spanish, but that really doesn't matter. This video is not about learning Spanish. This method will work for learning any language. My goal of this video is to convince you that this is the best way to learn a language and the most efficient, easiest, and most fun way to learn a language. And I'm going to go over all the reasons why I think this is the best way to learn. And I think by the end of this video, you will be convinced. So first, let me give you some backstory. Before I started watching shows and movies in Spanish to learn, I had been learning for maybe about a year and a half, but I hadn't really learned much. And I wasn't really working hard enough at it. When I first started, I just started using YouTube and watching lessons, like learning vocabulary stuff. I think when I very first started, I just learned like how to count to 20 and then like days of the week and just little things like that. And then for a long time, I was very lazy and I just used Duolingo pretty much for a year straight also. Almost exactly a year I was using Duolingo, and I was just using it every single day for 20 minutes or at least 20 minutes. And I thought that I had learned a lot. I thought that I'd kind of gotten decent. And then I went to Mexico City in January of 2023. I went to Mexico City for 10 days and I went by myself. And I realized that I could not understand anything that anyone said. I realized like how much my Spanish just sucked. Like I really hadn't learned much. I knew some very basic stuff. Like I could kind of ask for directions. I could order food. I could really basic get to know you like very simple get to know you conversation with someone. But like I couldn't even, when people would tell me the directions that I asked for, I couldn't even really understand it. When I realized that I couldn't understand anything, I was like, all right, I need to practice listening. I need to be able to, I want to be able to understand people, what people are saying. So actually, when I was in Mexico City, I even started this, and I just started doing this every single day. When I first started, it probably took me like a half an hour to get through maybe 5 minutes of the show, like 5 minutes of footage, because I knew so little. Anything that wasn't just like a 2-word phrase or something very, very simple, I had to pause it, look up a bunch of words in the dictionary, and I had to even look up like whole sentences and phrases in Google Translate because I didn't even really understand the sentence structure that well of Spanish. When you first start doing this, unless you're already pretty advanced, it will be really hard. It'll be kind of uncomfortable and it'll take a lot more work at first. But it maybe took me, I don't know, like 5 months or 6 months or something. And I got to a certain point, and then I started only watching shows and movies in Spanish. It might have even been after 4 months or something. I can't really remember, but sometimes at first, when I was just really tired or really wanted to watch a certain thing, I would still watch it in English because it did take a lot more effort to go through it in Spanish. But the better you get, the more time you put into it, like, it just gets easier and easier, and you can really just enjoy watching the shows and movies like you normally would. Pretty much for when I started this, that's mostly all I've been doing, is just watching shows and movies, and I also watch or listen to a lot of YouTube videos to learn. I have done other things to learn as well. Like, I've read, I think, 4 full books. They're pretty short books, and they were like easy to read ones. I started out with Ollie Richards' books. He has they're like graded reader ones with short stories. I definitely recommend those. I still do a lot of texting, sort of like constantly texting people in Spanish, like friends that I have. And I have also done quite a bit of speaking too with native speakers, like especially over phone calls, like doing video chat also. But the majority of the time I spend is just watching TVs and shows. I've spent way more time doing that, and I feel like I've learned the most out of doing that and learned the fastest from doing that also. I've definitely tried a bunch of different ways of learning, and I've found that like watching movies and TV shows, for me, I would argue probably for almost anyone, is the best method to learn, is the best way to learn, and there's many reasons for this. Probably most people like me are already watching like Netflix, or I know if you're watching this video that you watch YouTube already. And you can watch YouTube videos in the same way pretty much. And trust me, you do not need to like study all of the grammar or memorize words in flashcards in order to remember stuff and in order to be able to speak. When I first started learning, I was like memorizing words and stuff in order to speak, and now a lot of times the right word will just pop out because I've just heard it so many times. Like, I've had just such a massive amount of input from listening that the words, I just learn them automatically without really studying. It's something that you're doing already anyway, every day probably. Now when I do this every day, I'm learning a language at the same time. It isn't so much of a waste of time. I don't have to take any extra time out of my schedule to do this. And if I do take more time out of my schedule, then it ends up being a good thing. I'm just learning more of the language that I'm wanting to learn and improving myself more. I actually feel guilty now if I don't watch enough TV shows and Netflix. It's totally free. YouTube is free, and then pretty much everyone has at least one streaming service they're either already paying for, or everybody has like a parent or an uncle or an ex-lover or someone whose Netflix account they have a password to. Another big thing is the convenience factor. You can do this anywhere, anytime, and you don't need another person to help you learn from. All you need is like a phone or a computer or TV. Most people will say, and I agree with this, that input is the most important thing when learning, and input is just listening. Like, you're probably going to find that probably the most important thing, more than being able to talk really well, being able to understand people. Like, you need to be able to understand people when they talk to you, and really the only way to do this is to listen and listen and listen to just a lot of speech. And I really want people to understand that being able to understand people is by far the hardest part of learning a language, and it's the most important part. I would much rather be able to understand 100% of what people are saying and not be able to say anything than the other way around. Yeah, like, speaking perfectly is basically just as hard as being able to understand everything, but able to have a conversation, you do not need to speak perfectly. You can speak with a ton of grammatical errors and with a thick accent. Basically, you only have to speak well enough so that people can understand what you're saying, and so that you can figure out a way to say anything that you want to say and have it understood. One great thing about movies and shows, depending on what you watch, but you can get very natural speech, like actual ways of talking, words that people use, that people will use in real life when you talk to them. Like, as opposed to books, I'd say that movies and shows use much more natural words and dialogue, where a lot of times books can use words and ways of kind of speaking that like people don't really speak like that in real life. We'll say, and I agree with this too, I've found this to be true with my learning experience, that it's easier to remember things when there's context to it, when there's a story to it. And with movies and shows, you're obviously getting the story, and that's one of the reasons why I like series a lot. Like, there's this ongoing story that you just get sucked into, and when you're using it to learn a language, it makes you keep wanting to watch more and more shows, and you get into the story and you want to understand everything. It's perfect for learning as well. It just makes you want to keep watching, and it makes it easier to remember certain things. And you get the visuals and a lot of context with everything, including the context with the visuals. Unlike when you're just reading, you're getting a lot of visual stuff that helps you to understand what is being said, even when you don't understand words or like multiple words. It's a lot of times, even when you don't understand an entire phrase or sentence, you've never heard it before, but you pretty much know what they've said just from the context of the show. And by the amount of words it is, you're like, oh, like, I know they're saying something like this. Another huge benefit, you can get subtitles with what you're listening to. You can learn a lot better and faster this way than like just speaking to natives. You're like having conversations with natives. When you don't understand something, you can't hear it. And a lot of times, just by hearing it, you won't be able to understand it well enough so that you can look up the word in the dictionary. The subtitles are they're key, they're clutch. Like, if I could have subtitles when I was talking to people in real life, I would be able to learn way faster, learn much more. Like, the subtitles are just key, and they really skyrocket your learning. And just learn, you can learn and comprehend stuff. If you don't understand something, you can pause it. You can take more time and read it. You can look up words in the dictionary if you have to. You can even you can even switch the subtitles back to English or your native language, and then switch it back if you want to understand it. Sometimes I'll do that too. Whereas a lot of times, if you're just listening to something without subtitles, you have no way of really figuring it out a lot of the times. Also great to practice pronunciation too, because you can take a phrase or a sentence and you can try to copy it, and you can replay it over and over and over again and say it over and over and over until you get it like perfectly. And you're copying it from actual native speakers, not an AI voice or anything like that. And it's how people really talk in real life. I argue another huge benefit to learning this way is it can take very little energy. More so when you get better, because when you're first starting, if you don't know much yet, like, you're gonna have to pause stuff and look stuff up in the dictionary more, and it'll take more energy. But you can still do that while you're laying in bed. And the better you get, the less work you have to do, and it's just like watching, more closer to watching a series anyway. Like, when I watch, I lay back on my bed right there. My computer screen is right here. I bring my Bluetooth keyboard and my mouse back on the bed, and to re-listen to stuff I didn't understand completely or pause, I just use the keyboard. I just click the back arrows, and it just hops back 10 or 15 seconds or whatever it is for the different streaming services, and I can just rewatch it over and over and over again. And it barely takes me any extra energy now than if I was just watching Netflix anyway. And it's a way that I can learn while I'm relaxing, and I don't have to take any extra energy out of my day. And obviously, you can even watch stuff on your phone while you're completely laying down in bed in the dark. So now that I've convinced you that you should start doing this, you might be wondering like what types of shows are best to watch and how to find those shows. Also, how to do this in an optimal way so that you learn the most and you learn as fast as you possibly can. And if those things interest you, then you should watch my other videos right here.